All right, anxiety and introverts. Here's what I have found is that when we don't, I'll talk about anxiety first. So there's a lot of different ways for anxiety to manifest in people. Three of the most common ones that I see are quite often it is learned genetics. So I don't know about the genetics probably, but definitely more often than not, there's a parent that had anxiety, and unintentionally, the anxiety gets passed down to the kid. My so a lot of times we pick it up probably through DNA, but also through watching our parents, like the parent that is scared of flying and is taking their kids on a plane, and I've seen this in real life. That parent might spend a lot of time talking about how the kid doesn't have to be scared about anxiety because the parent is scared. But in saying, oh, you don't have to be scared, the plane won't crash, this won't happen, the next thing won't happen, the kid had no reason to fear flying until the mom or the parent, freaking out, tries to calm herself down by calming her kid down and unintentionally puts a bunch of scary things in the kid's head. So that's one way anxiety shows up, and I see that a lot. Another common thing is trauma, and this makes sense, of course, and this is because I worked primarily with anxiety. I kept having these clients show up with trauma, but their presenting was anxiety, and so that's how I got into EMDR basically. And trauma makes a lot of sense too if you think about it. If you grow up in a household where it's unpredictable, where you never know when your parent slash caregiver slash abuser, if they're going to be safe or unsafe. We don't know if dad is going to come home drunk and abusive or sober and happy and fun and wanting to play. In those, and that's an example, that's not exhaustive, but in those situations, we have to stay on all the time. So our amygdala back here that scans for danger is always activated because there is always the risk of danger. Like think about that. Think about growing up in a household that isn't safe, or let's even go bigger, in a fucking neighborhood that isn't safe, or you get what I'm saying. So if you grow up where you don't have this guarantee of safety 99% of the time, your amygdala is always awake. Your amygdala is like, there's a bear around the next corner and I have to keep an eye out for it and I have to protect myself for it. That changes our brains and it changes our nervous systems, and it creates anxiety as an ongoing symptom in our lives. That being said, that does not mean that we're stuck with that anxiety, right? We know, thank goodness that now we know there's neuroplasticity, there are effective treatments such as cognitive behavioral, exposure response therapy is great for some, right? Some anxiety stuff, and of course EMDR, the desensitization part of EMDR, and the reprocessing of the trauma memories. But trauma is another big cause for anxiety. So those are two of the common ones. The one that I want to talk about links in, I don't even know if this is accurate. I see it a lot, almost always with people with social anxiety. So with social anxiety, almost always they're introverts, but also introverts that don't honor their introverted nature. So our brains process differently, our nervous systems process differently, and as a result, if we get too drained, then we can end up feeling anxious, irritable, out of sorts, all those things. Okay, so I will also say, as I'm sure almost everybody is thinking at this point, the good news is, fucking pandemic, baby, shelter in place. You know, us introverts are like, oh, so basically you're giving me permission to live my life pretty much how I wanted to live it anyway. I'll speak for myself. Yeah, I don't mind staying home a lot of the time. I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons I wanted a new house closer to town, so I can be a little bit more comfortable and a little bit set up. Because I think, sorry about the jiggling, I think that once we do get to return to being out and about, I will definitely be out and about, but I think I never knew how much I loved and how much I needed to be home as much as I am. So if I can make that as big a part of my life as possible going on forward, I'm doing it. Okay, so of course we know introverts were made for shelter in place orders, and it is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's definitely not as hard for us. I think it is useful to kind of talk about some of the myths, some of the things that people think introverts are, because it's not real. And then I want to talk about what being an introvert is, at least some of it. This is too big a topic, I think, to cover in just half an hour. And how us taking care of our introverted nature can decrease anxiety. So let's do the myths first. This is so important, and I cannot stress this enough. Being an introvert does not mean we don't need people. And it's really easy for introverts to think that's what it is, and to fall into that trap. And if we're like, we don't need people, we can be alone forever because it's very comfortable. And if we actually follow that, then we end up depressed. So being an introvert does not mean you don't need people. You absolutely do. We are all human animals. We are all social animals, regardless of our personality types. We all need those connections, every single one of us. Introverts just need a little bit less of it than extroverts. So, doesn't mean that we don't need people. It doesn't mean that we don't like people. I don't know why. I don't know where the fuck this came from that introverts don't like people. Like, I am hardcore an introvert. There's no doubt about it. And yet, I help people. I work with people. I like people. I do all this for a living. So, it doesn't mean we don't like people. Being an introvert does not necessarily mean that we are going to be socially awkward. And I'll hear, well, I'm not an introvert because I can talk fine with people, or I get along great with people, or I like people. That's fine. Some introverts are socially awkward, but that's because they got made fun of. So let's be really clear. If you have social anxiety, if you're shy, if you have the social awkwardness, it is, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. Part of it is socialization, being socialized at an early age. But the other part of it is absolutely that you were made to feel self-conscious about being an introvert. So if you would prefer to go out on Christmas Day and visit with everybody for 10, 20, 30 minutes, and then you want to go in your room and read for the rest of the day, if you were shamed for that and made to feel weird, then you're going to start freaking out about your introverted nature and be self-conscious about it, and then that translates into being socially awkward, shy, social anxiety, all those things. But they're not like, introverts don't have to be socially anxious or socially awkward. That is a learned response to icky stuff. So introverts, I think it's important to say that we, and I think we know this, right? Let me back up a little bit. So there's, and I'm not going to do well with the names, but there's research that shows when extroverts go to social situations. So think Times Square when the ball drops on New Year's, which is like my biggest nightmare. I'm like, oh my God, that would destroy me, right? Extroverts go to those situations and they get dopamine hits, and they're like, their pleasure centers light up. They're like, this is fucking awesome. I love this. Our pleasure centers don't light up. We don't get those dopamine hits. And in fact, we are more sensitive to sensory input. And I personally think we are more sensitive. I think we're empaths also. So because the sensory input is, we feel it more, we take in more, it tires us out in a way it doesn't with extroverts. So it's almost like we're looking directly at the sun when we're in social situations. And, you know, it's just barely getting light outside for extroverts. I like that. That's a nice way to describe it. So that's the difference. So same Times Square, right? New Year's Eve. For me, that would be like looking in the sun. It would just absolutely overwhelm me. It would be so much. And yet for an extrovert, it would be like, I don't know, mid-morning with the sun. And they're not, and they've got sunglasses on and they're not looking at it. They're like, this is perfect. So we are more sensitive to sensory inputs, which is why we prefer calm, we prefer quiet. I would even say we need calm and quiet. So if we go into these social situations, we need them. Like for a while I used to sell soap, and I would go to like a craft fair or something for the day, and I'd be on the entire time talking and pushing and and engaging and doing all that. Let's be clear, I loved it. It was so much fun. But I would go home and I would need to be alone and like not talk for a couple days because it just absolutely threw me on empty. An extrovert would do that and be like, that was perfect. Can I have some more? So we need time alone. We need quiet. We need less sensory input. Like we need that. And we need to be able to recharge our batteries. If we can't do that, if our batteries get on empty, then it's just going to have a negative effect on us. And part of that negative effect is going to be anxious. If we're I read an article, and it was like, I kind of like this. It's like sensory input for us is like taking in too much sugar, and we're hopped up and we're all over the place, versus extroverts where it's just the norm. So we need that time to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, we burn out and we end up irritable. We end up anxious. Like anytime we're not true to ourselves, we end up feeling horrible. If we have been, again, shamed about being an introvert and needing this alone time, then we can feel awkward talking to people, and we think there's something like, if we've been told being an introvert isn't okay, then when we're out in crowds or in social occasions, being our regular introverted self, we think there's something wrong with it. And then we become self-conscious, and then we become socially anxious, socially awkward. It's important, and this was so normalizing for me. Like small talk just isn't useful to introverts. Like, it's just stupid. What? Who? Why? I've gotten really good at faking it, but my heart is never in small talk, and that's normal for introverts. We don't want to engage in that whatever it is. Like, it does nothing for us. It gives us no positive from it. And think about, like, at the Zen Center when we go to, it's not our Christmas, our Bodhi Day celebration, and there's times where everybody else is just chit-chatting small talk. And I love being, like, Bodhi Day is one of my favorite things at the Zen Center. I love being there. But there's times where I just hear everybody talking about nothing, and I just let it wash over me, and I'll have moments of being exhausted. It takes actual effort to turn on that kind of behavior for me. It doesn't come naturally. That's not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. That's me just being an introvert. We just don't care for that kind of stuff. I have my little list here, so I'm looking down it. So I talked about how we don't get that dopamine hit at big social things. We do get another, and I can't say it's another hormone, it's another reward, like, yay, everything feels good in our brain for quiet times. So whatever, and I'm not, like, I can't say it. I didn't even bother writing it down because I'm like, I'm not even going to try. So for me, that would be still, even in shelter in place, my favorite days are Saturdays. Because Saturdays, I turn off. My laptop goes away. I do no Zoom. I do nothing. I stay home. I clean. I read. I listen to podcasts. I watch TV. Hi, Shannon. Oh, see, you love being home too. I think it's like and I'm going to do the sibling, but I think it's like a sibling trait, because most siblings seem to, and I know technically you're not, but whatever. We tend to all be introverts. Social hour before meeting, small talk up. Yes. Like what? Why? Who? And yet I also realize that there's a necessity for that. So, okay, so Saturdays at home, no Zoom, no anything online. If we weren't shelter in place, I wouldn't want to go anywhere when I can pull it off. I stay home, I clean, I read, I cook, I watch TV. And by Sunday, I feel amazing. Like that, there's such a sense of well-being for that. That's an introvert thing. That's normal to us. So think about, if you're an introvert and you're not giving yourself that reward, you're not giving yourself that chemical hit of feel good that we get from days like my stupid Saturdays, then of course you're going to get worn down. And of course you're not going to feel good. And of course anxiety spikes from that. To me, that just makes sense. Introspection. I found this interesting, and I think it makes sense. So there seems to be some maybes about, like, extroverts take in sensory input. There's a shorter path in their brain, and it's a little bit more convoluted. For us, we take things in, it kind of wanders and meanders in our brain, which means it would take more work and energy, which helps explain the tiredness. But the other result is, because we need to be alone, and because we love being alone, we usually, and I think this makes sense, we end up doing things like we read more, we just think more, we spend more time in our head because we're by ourselves. And so we engage in more introspection. And again, maybe not all introverts are empaths, but I'm pretty positive almost all empaths are introverts. And that also, like, if we can feel other people's energies, and I truly believe that's real, and I think science will back me up someday, then of course we're going to think more about it. So we have more introspection, and therefore we value the deeper conversations, the real conversations. And as a result, also, this is another big one, we will probably find ourselves only with a few close connections. Extroverts, like 50 billion people, man, because they're always on and they're always engaged, and that's what makes them feel good. We don't feel that. So we don't need that, so we don't have it. And if we want those, if we need those deep, quieter conversations, then we're going to invest our limited resources into just a couple close connections instead of 50,000 broader ones. And I'm not even saying extroverts, there's no right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's that our brains work differently. And for some reason, society thinks that extroverts' behaviors are good and introverts are like weird or something. So, because I have limited amount of energy to invest in people, and because I think deeper and I think more because I'm alone more, I value a couple few relationships over 50. The problem is that quite often introverts come into my office and they think there's something wrong with them because they don't have 1,000 friends, or because they don't have the Insta fucking feeds that like these fake people have. So because they don't have, they're not off going from party to party and vacay to vacay and girls whatever, all this stuff, they're like, I'm a loser, there's something wrong with me, I'm bad because I don't have this huge social network. One, what you see on social media is fake. Please let us remember that. It's never real. It's always curated. Two, as introverts, like what? It exhausts me just thinking about living that kind of life. So even if I could live that kind of life, and even if you could if you're an introvert, we really don't want to. And we don't have the resources to do that emotionally and energy-wise. But if we see the fake, and if we think that's how we should be living, and then we see our introverted reality, it's really easy to get stuck in what's wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with being an introvert. There's nothing wrong with enjoying being alone, of caring for just a couple people instead of 50. It's good. It's fine. I don't want to say it's better. I think it's better, but that's not real, right? I think it's better because it's the only life I've led. So I can't even comprehend what being an extrovert was like. So, I mean, it's good that I'm at peace with it and I enjoy it, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. I think that's the big things. If anybody else, so Shannon, I know, I appreciate that you added some things. Anybody else have anything else? So, introvert doesn't mean we hate people. It doesn't mean we don't need people. It doesn't guarantee that we're socially awkward, right? Because I am pretty good socially. It's taken time to learn it, but we can absolutely go to parties and we can have fun and we can engage with people, but we have to turn it on. And if we turn it on, we have to come home and recharge that battery. If you don't do that, then you have the anxiety, especially, I think. And then if you play too much to your introverted strengths and you never leave your house, which is easy to do in a pandemic, and you don't interact with people and you don't engage, then we end up in depression. Being introverted is glorious. There's a lot of benefits, but being the Zen Buddhist that I am, we want to go for that middle path. We don't want to get too far out there past what's normal or healthy for us, and we don't want to go too far inward so that we end up depressed. We want that middle path of taking care of ourselves, and accepting, especially accepting our introverted nature, understanding that it's a brain thing, and not judging ourselves for it. Okay, I think that's it for today. Be safe, be healthy, have a good week. I'll see you guys next week. Peace.